But if you've ever driven in silence and you've pondered the great questions of the world, and you've carried all that on your shoulders, 2 hours is about the max that you can do it, right? Before your brain starts to get a little bit heavy and a little bit foggy, and you start to teeter on the road a little bit, you just need a little bit of a relief. And music tends to be that when most of us get in the car. And so as I'm thinking this week, pondering life, a song pops in my head. And it's a very old song, a song that I've heard many, many times, and I've played in great moments and in terrible moments. The song by Curtis Mayfield, you may know that name. And it's a song called People Get Ready. He goes, people get ready, there's a train a-coming. Don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. This song is very, very old. It was composed in 1965, a couple of years before I was born. It was written by Mayfield. And the whole purpose of the song is to depict the Christian afterlife. And he depicts it in a way that he never actually explicitly mentions it. When he was asked about the song and the lyrics therein, he said, "This is a perfect example of what I believe has laid into my subconscious as to the preaching of my grandmother and most ministers when they reflect from the Bible." And you know what it is? That image of hopping aboard a train, right? Of being completely empty-handed, just hoping to catch that train. And jumping aboard with a full heart, well, it's a wonderful and exhilarating idea, right? And we've all have the power to lean into faith. We all have the power to climb aboard that train on a journey to freedom. We don't need no baggage, you just get on board, right? And you've been on trips, and you know how you pack. Doesn't sound much like our lives. But it's easy and it's fun to think about, not packing a bag and just hopping on board. But I want you to raise your hand if you don't have any baggage. Not so much. You know, the older I get, the more I realize that it's really hard to get rid of luggage, like actual physical luggage. Once you get a bag, you just kind of keep it for forever. Even though it needs replaced, you just hold on to it and store it out in the garage somewhere. And our personal baggage is much like that. We just pile on and pile on and pile on. And the truth is that most of us, even if we don't want to acknowledge it, we have baggage that we lug around with us. We have memories and fears. We have our doubts and our insecurities. We have these pains, this trauma, this regret. And however much we'd like to say it isn't there, it is, right? And we can say we've healed, right? We've moved past it. But the 100-pound bag that we're lugging around, well, it would say something different, wouldn't it? The truth is that healing requires more than just a Band-Aid. Requires more than just a little bit of church or a little bit of counseling. It requires real intentional work, a real commitment, a real focus. It requires acceptance, forgiveness, accountability, amends, patience, and above all else, it requires grace. You know, several years ago, we all experienced the Me Too movement. And it seemed like this movement was forging a path towards some healing. And women all across the country were opening up about trauma that they've experienced, and that's the first step to healing. And in the midst of this raw truth and honesty, there started to be a light that shined on darkness that had been present in industries all throughout our culture. And even sitting in 2024, it seems like veils are being lifted. And more light has been shining even into the darkest corners of the world, even into church cultures, even into those places that we never thought darkness would touch. And as this light began to cast its accountability around, the powerful men and powerful people began to face the truth. And we saw name after name after name being pushed through the headlines as allegations began to pour in. And over the years, countless people have had to answer for their actions. And it was lauded as this wonderful moment in all of our history, right, where people could stand up in honesty and truth, that we could all heal. But with any movement, it had its flaws, right? You see, in a lot of ways, the movement was really ultimately at its core about healing, which is where we all want to be, healed. It was about honesty and standing in your truth. But you can't heal a wound that you don't even acknowledge is there. But there's an important step that was missed somewhere in the midst of all of this process. And that was forgiveness and grace. We were all for the accountability part, but not so much for the reintroduction into society part. You know, forgiveness is a slippery slope. You know, who am I? Who is anyone to stand before you and ask that a woman who was assaulted in any way forgive her assailant? It's not realistic, and it's not easy. But forgiveness is a piece of that healing process. And for so many of us that have experienced trauma, that have experienced betrayal, that have experienced any number of pains in our lives, this is the last part of that healing process. But what about grace? What about grace? You see, very quickly, as the Me Too movement gathered speed, it picked up political power, and with that political power, social power, as this idea of speaking truth to power. We like that concept as regular American folk, right? We should speak truth to power. And it's a wonderful thing. It's beautiful, it's needed, it's honorable. But somewhere in the midst of that, it bulldozed over the idea of healing. In our pursuit of justice and accountability of truth, we didn't really create a path towards reconciliation. We didn't create a path towards rehabilitation, and we most certainly didn't create a path towards forgiveness. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever made a mistake. Yes. Of course you have. Of course you have. To err is human, but to forgive is divine. Now imagine if you were defined by the worst thing that you've ever done. If your worth was entirely dictated by that mistake. You were summed up by your biggest failure. You know, some of us would walk around this world with a label that says cheater, and that's all that the world would ever see of us. And some of us would be walking around with a label that said thief, and that's all anyone would see. And some people will be walking around with a label that said drunk, and that's all anyone would ever see. And other people will be walking around with the label abuser, and that's all that they would ever be. And the worst of us will be walking around with a label that says person who heats up fish in the microwave at work. Don't do that. Don't be that person. Truth is that God sees flaws, or the truth is that we see flaws, right? But God just sees people. Now, I did a lot of prison ministry when I was first starting in ministry. And I'd sit with people that were the most earnest believers that you can imagine, people that were entirely dependent. Their entire life was dependent on their faith in God, because that's all that they had left. They had laid everything else down, and all they had left was God. And yet, even with that tremendous faith, I encountered person after person after person that could not look past their own mistakes. As though one page of the book of your life defines all the rest. But that's not the way that it works, is it? What's on page 20 doesn't matter nearly as much as what's on the last page of that book. From Psalm 139, you have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. And you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All of the days ordained for me were written in your book before even one of them came true. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Without a doubt, God has created us from the very beginning of our inception, woven into the very spirit of our lives, created us to be more, to be hope, to be love. And in that love, cradled right in the midst, is acceptance. An acceptance that we may stray from the path, that we may turn our backs on God, but grace still reigns. And I know you've wandered through this life, friends. I know you've taken wrong turns. I know that you've made mistakes. You admitted so today, right? But even in the midst of that, God didn't turn back on you. God shows us that we are so much more than our worst mistakes, that there's always a road back home. And if we're willing to do the work, if we're willing to do the healing, that we shall always persevere. During that drive, I listened to a couple podcasts, and there was an old podcast that an actor, Shia LaBeouf, was on. And so he's in a couple new movies, and he's circling again. But he had a period where he got caught up in the Me Too movement, and he wasn't around so much. If you don't know Shia, he was originally a Disney Channel actor on a show called Even Stevens. And he's one of the few child actors that's actually grown up into an adult and garnered some real attention on the acting sphere. He's been in critically acclaimed Hollywood films like Holes, Transformers, Fury, Indiana Jones, even though we may not talk about that one, Lawless, The Peanut Butter Falcon, or Pieces of a Woman. You see, Shia was part of the Me Too movement because he was accused of abuse by one of his ex-girlfriends. And as a result of those accusations, he was out of the spotlight for a number of years. And I walked into this podcast with this image of who he was. And that image was tarnished, right? I thought I knew who the man was. I saw this narcissistic abuser who was power hungry, who didn't care who he hurt. And why did I think that of him? Why did I have that image in my head? Because somewhere in the midst of all of this justice, we've been so focused that we forgot that there's people on the other side of everything in this life. And so while I walked into the interviews with this preconceived notion of who he was, after I listened, I encountered a different person with no road to recovery, to rehabilitation or reconciliation. Those humans on the other side of all of these movements are reintroduced into the world in their most vulnerable state, reduced to their worth being defined by the worst moments of their lives. And some might say that's fair, that it's justice, that it's karma, but human is human, and grace is for all. We can list all the people in the Bible that made mistake after mistake after mistake, and God still chose them. In this interview, Shia said something that I can't get out of my head. He said, "You haven't hit rock bottom until you break your own heart." And it was so powerful. You haven't hit rock bottom until you break your own heart. Until we recalibrate our minds to remove the shame cycle, to remove the negative self-talk in our heads, we can't heal. If we can't heal, we can't grow. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. From darkness, there is light. And God does not abandon us even in the depths. Even at the darkest moments of our lives, God is there. And if God created you and loves you and thinks that you're worthy, who are you to question? To err is human. To forgive is divine. Light is not the absence of darkness, nor faith the absence of fear. You are worthy of the call. Period. And if you lean into that call, you shall hear the voice of God saying, people get ready. There's a train coming. You don't need no baggage. You just get on board. And all you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. You don't need no ticket. You just thank the Lord. Faith is as hard as you make it and as easy as you allow it to be. And you don't need a ticket. You don't need to go in your house and pack a bag. You just get right on board. You're making decisions with every single moment of your life, my friends. Choices that dictate where you go and ultimately who you'll become. So what if you choose faith? The truth is you're being called to be more. You are so much more than your worst mistake. God chose you and set a path forward, a path towards healing, a path towards forgiveness, a path towards grace. The question is, what label do you want to wear? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord. Thanks be to God.
This is the hope of God set free. These are your thoughts.